If designing a kitchen seems like a colossal task or you're just not sure where to start, this video will help you get things started on the right foot so you can have the most success in your next kitchen renovation. It outlines my thought process as I design kitchens for my clients. So this is the Kitchen Design Bootcamp. All right, so everything you're going to need to know to design your kitchen. Number one is to measure once and install twice. And of course, I got that backwards and I meant to do that. You got to measure twice, measure 3 times, measure 4 times, measure as many times as possible so that you only do have to install one time. And this is something that seems so obvious. Obviously, you want to measure it and be accurate. Always double check your measurements. Always go back through and just do it one more time just to make sure that you are absolutely positively sure on all your measurements. This is the critical part of a kitchen design, almost more than anything else, is that the measurements have to be accurate and correct at the get-go. Now, of course, you can go back and fix things later, and that's all fine. But the better job you can do at the beginning of getting all the accurate measurements, the better you're going to have throughout the whole process, because it's going to cause less hiccups in the long run. So you want to measure a few times, and you want to be mindful of what you're measuring and how you're measuring. And I've mentioned it before that if you're using a tape measure and you flip it upside down, depending on the type of tape measure that you have, those numbers flip upside down. Now, some tape measures have numbers that are right side up on both sides, but a lot of them don't. And so if you flip it upside down and you read 35 inches, but really it's 53 inches, that's a big issue. That's a lot of inches in the difference, and it's going to cause you a problem. And I know this from personal experience because it's happened to me on a number of occasions in a professional setting where it costs money, and that's no fun. And it's embarrassing, but it happens to the best of us, and there you go. So double check your measurements and make sure you're reading your tape measure, the right way. Keep it consistent. And what I mean by that is when you're writing down measurements, when you're measuring a kitchen, when you're writing those measurements down, if you're writing in feet and inches, do everything in feet and inches. Or if you're measuring in just inches and you're writing down in inches, do everything in inches. And this is what can happen if you don't. You might have a section that's 45 inches long, and then you might measure the next section and it's 4'5" long. And those are completely different measurements, but the numbers look the same. These little things can really get you mixed up when you are drawing out a dimension sheet, when you're drawing out a floor plan, or if you're taking those measurements to a designer like myself or somewhere like Home Depot or even into IKEA or something, that can be a real issue. So make sure you keep the measurements consistent all the time and you are mindful that you're doing that. What I like to personally do is to write everything down in inches, and that way I don't have to worry about it. It's 108, not 10'8". I don't have to think, did I do this wrong? I do this consistently all the time. Now, I just built that into my workflow because I had to do it for a living, but it's a really good thing to think about if you're going to do it, even if you're doing it one time for your own kitchen, because you want to renovate. That's really important. The next thing is important is to measure against the wall. While you can measure along the front of your cabinet, it is important to measure everything as best you can on the back on the wall. Now, some things you can't access. Maybe there's a fridge in the way, or maybe there's a pantry. And so in those instances, yes, you have to measure on the front. But when you can, measure against the wall the best you can. This will give you the best lay of the land as far as what your walls are going to be measured at. Now, what happens at the front is if your walls aren't square, if you have an L shape, say, and that wall isn't square, the measurement on the front could be different than the measurement on the back, obviously, because the walls are out of whack. So you always want to measure at the back to get the most accurate depiction of the wall space that's there. You'll have the best success at getting something that's accurate. Now, the next thing is to measure your outlets. You got to know where your electricity, where your outlets are, and especially the range. And I mentioned the range specifically because wherever your range is, your stove, if you have a one double unit, like cooktop range combination, we just call it a range. If you have one of those, the plug for that could be in the center. It could be off of the center of that. It could be anywhere within that 30-inch space that normally your range takes up. Now, if you can pull the range out and measure and get the exact center of that plug, that's really beneficial, because then you'll know when you're drawing out your floor plan or when you're planning out your kitchen that you can move that range within a certain amount of distance, because at the very center, you have 15 inches on one side that you can move it and 15 inches on the other. But if that range plug is right at the start of the range and you don't have any wiggle room to go, the other way, then if you don't know that and you want to move that range, you could run into problems. So the best thing is if you can move out your stove. It's kind of a pain, but if you can do it, do that, so you'll know exactly where that range plug is. That's the real important one. All the other ones are important, but that's really the one that I like to know exactly the center of when I'm drying up a kitchen. And of course, the outlets, you should just know where they're at so that you don't accidentally cover it with a fridge, or you cover it with some other kind of tall cabinet because you weren't thinking about it. Before I jump into the next section, if you would like help on how to accurately measure your kitchen, there's a free guide in the description below. Click the link for details. Concept for layouts. This means that you have to figure out some kind of floor plan that's going to work for your space. Now, I always recommend that you get two concepts, two drafts, two ideas for the space that you have, so that you have some kind of idea of what the fridge could look like on this wall, or what the stove could look like on this wall, or if that was flipped around, or can things be moved in other areas. And oftentimes this doesn't happen. But I really, really suggest that if you're going to anywhere to get your kitchen designed, or if you're doing it yourself, that you come up with a couple different layout options for your space. Now, obviously, you need to start with just one layout because you have to get something down on paper, but it is important that you think about where things can go and how this kitchen can be laid out in different ways. It helps to narrow down what you do like and what you don't like. It helps you figure out the best plan for the space. When you are doing it yourself, whether or not you're going to design this kitchen yourself and build it, or bring it to IKEA or some place like that where you're buying cabinets, or you're bringing it to a designer to design, you're bringing in your measurements or giving your measurements, you should do it on graph paper as much as possible, because that way you can use the grids to kind of scale out your drawing a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect by any means, but it does help that if you use the 4x4 grid, and all graph paper is a little different, there's different size graph paper, but generally speaking, if you use a 4x4 grid, you call that 1 square foot, then you'll be able to draw out your measurements a little more accurately, and it helps to visualize it on paper. And it really helps a designer when they're looking at it to try to figure out if there's some questions. At least they have that scale that they can work with, and it really does come in handy. All you need to draw is a very simple floor plan, or what's called an elevation. Now, an elevation is a 2D drawing of basically what a wall of your kitchen is going to look like. And I have one here to show you. This is done on my design program, but it doesn't really matter what you're using. You can basically think about this as a hand-drawn sketch. And if it's hand-drawn, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfectly to scale, but this is what's called an elevation view. This is what that wall is going to look like in a 2D format. You can easily draw this up, and it gives you a really great picture of what your cabinets are going to look like. And all you're doing is drawing straight lines. So you don't have to be an artist. You don't have to be anything like that. Just a ruler, straight lines, and a scale of a graph paper, and you can easily draw something like this. Now, this one's a little more complicated just because it's done on software, but the idea is the same. Now, a floor plan is what this would be when someone talks about a floor plan, and it's just a top-down look at a bunch of rectangles, basically. And this is what would be used by the designer to figure out what's going to fit where, and how much space you have between a wall and a corner and whatnot. Just by drawing lines on a paper, you can easily do something like this. It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, you don't have to draw any cabinets in your floor plan. All you need to draw are walls and windows so that someone else can put the cabinets in. So really, all you need to do is draw a couple straight lines. However many walls there are in your kitchen, draw those straight lines, add in a few windows, which are just little rectangles, and a bunch of measurements, and you're good to go. So that's the basics of what you need to do on that graph paper. And it doesn't take much. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be professional. As long as the measurements are accurate, you'll be in good position. Of course, there's online free software. And if you're going to some place like IKEA or other places, you can use their integrated software that's for their, their cabinetry. And that is very helpful, like especially IKEA. If you're going there and you get on, you use their software, it's all preloaded with their stuff and you can easily put it in there on the floor plan and it'll give you a price, but it doesn't need to be that complicated by any means. Then you make a floor plan. What I like to do first, and I'll jump back to my floor plan, is I like to center my sink. I like to find out where my sink's going to go. And in my particular kitchen, my sink is under my window. And this floor plan is of my kitchen. Wherever that sink is going to be, that's usually the first thing I put in a floor plan so that I can then work out from that. Okay, that's one of the most important things. You don't have to start there, but I recommend starting there. It's the easiest. And then you move to the corner. And I figure out, what am I going to do in my corner for a cabinet? Am I going to put a cabinet? Am I going to block it off? What's going to be there? What room is left over? And of course, if you don't have a corner, then this doesn't matter. If you have a galley style, then all the better. But if you do have a corner, that's the next place to go to figure out what to do. So in my particular kitchen, I don't have a corner cabinet. I'm not a fan of them just because they're hard to access on the bottom, and I don't even mind losing the space. So I blocked it off and I put these other two cabinets next to it. But knowing where the sink is and then how much distance I have to the corner helps me figure that out. Now, the second thing I want to do, or the third thing after that, is to figure out where my appliances are going to go. Where are they going to be positioned? Now, appliances are generally, they have a little bit of wiggle room. So I talked about the range and knowing where the range plug is so that you can move that a little bit, left or right, whatever way is going to make, your design maybe symmetrical or whatnot. Put your appliances in. You should have an idea when you're doing this that you're going with whatever size fridge, range, and dishwasher that you want. Then you just put cabinets in wherever else. So you want to have a pantry, or you want to have, a drawer bank here, or whatever it is that you want to do. You have the main things in place that you can then work out from. So you have your sink in place, you have your corner solution figured out, you have where your appliances are generally going to be placed in that floor plan, and then you kind of fill in the blanks. You want to be thoughtful about it and put in cabinets that make sense for you and what you want to use, whether they're drawer banks or full height cabinets or a door and a drawer or whatever it is that you're looking for. This is how I approach all the designs that I do. And if you're doing it yourself, this is really, really beneficial. The next thing to think about is to create clearances. That means different things depending on what you're talking about. There's clearances for the ceiling. So are you going to the ceiling? If you are, well, how high is that ceiling and how much space is going to be to that ceiling? There has to be some space so that you can fill that with molding and allow for some wiggle room, because one, the floor is probably not level, or the ceiling's probably not level. Something's not level. I've never seen a house that's perfectly level. Surfaces, what I mean by surfaces, your countertop, you want to have clearances for countertop between one countertop and, say, an island, between a corner and another countertop. You just want to have the clearances, the walkthrough. You want to have enough space that people can get by each other, that doors can open. And so from surface to surface, having the proper clearances, creating a floor plan helps you figure out how much room you have to work with. Maybe you want an island. Well, I want the biggest island possible. How do I know what that's going to be if I don't know what my clearances are? If I don't have a floor plan that's accurately measured, I'm not going to know, or someone's not going to know. It has to be measured, and so understanding what your clearances are. This also comes into play when we're talking about landing areas next to appliances, next to sinks, next to your range, and having enough landing area so that you can take something out of the oven or the fridge and place it down. Appliances, of course, you should always know your appliance sizes before getting into a kitchen renovation. You should know the appliances that you're going with. And if you have new appliances that aren't there now, but you're going to renovate and get new appliances, know what the specs are on those and plan for those appliances. Knowing the size, the depth, the height, the width of those things is very important. It becomes even more important when you're talking about cutouts for inserts, such as a wall oven or a microwave or any other thing like a drawer mount, dishwasher or anything like that. Anything with a cutout, it's really important that you know those clearances and those sizes. Wall cabinets, of course. What I mean by this is that, let's say you have a range and above that range, you have a real nice vent hood. Well, how much clearance do you want between your wall cabinets, say on either side of that, and your range hood? How much clearance does it need? Does it call for? And what looks the best? 3 inches? Is it 6 inches? Do you want it as close as possible? So these are just some things to keep in mind. Of course, wall cabinets have to be mounted at a particular height that is standard. If this is going to change, that's fine. It can be lowered or higher, depending on what you want. That can be done. But it's important that you also know that if you're going to raise something or lower something, you do have a fridge cabinet, you probably have fridge panels, you might have a pantry, and those things are probably standard height. And so if you're going to lower something, then that's going to kind of mess up with the flow of what that's going to look like. So just something to think about, understanding your wall cabinets. Now, the most important thing about clearances, and this has to do with fillers. If you don't allow for fillers on end of a run against a wall, you are definitely going to find yourself in a little bit of trouble. Fillers are so important because they just take up the unlevelness, the unsquareness, the unplumbness of a wall or of a floor or of a ceiling for that matter. And that's absolutely vital. So make sure that if you're drawing your own floor plan, that you allow for fillers. You don't have to have a ton of room, but I always like to allow 3/4 to an inch of space, just so that when that cabinet goes in and it's not square, it's not plumb, whatever, that the drawer can open properly, the door can open, and that's really important. The reason fillers are so important even now is because mostly cabinets today are frameless. A lot of European style cabinets are on the market today. So, IKEA, that's all they do. And a lot of companies go with frameless cabinets. But if you are using a face framed cabinet where there is a stile and rail on the outside of that cabinet, then the sides of those cabinets and the rails go past that. So there is a little bit of wiggle room with a framed cabinet where you actually might get away with not having a filler, because you do have the style of that cabinet butting against the wall that you can shave off if you have to. You can plane it down, sand it down to match the wall. So that is something to think about if you're going with a framed cabinet. But if you're going with frameless cabinets, then it's important that you use fillers. So just a pro tip. Plan for storage. So this is the next thing. So this is all the other cabinets. You have your sink cabinet figured out. You have what you're going to do with your corner, you have your appliances, you're filling in cabinets, you're thinking about, I want a pantry, I want whatever. So planning for storage is really the next step. And planning for storage means, well, what do I need? I always like to think about having a pantry of some shape or form, whether it's a walk-in, whether it's a separate cabinet style. That's generally what we have here in North America, is either a walk-in or just a cabinet style pantry. And I always try to put a pantry in your kitchen. And we talk about in different times, different ways, different videos rather, the sizes that I would consider. And I like to go no narrower, no thinner than an 18-inch. And of course, 36 inches is usually the max. And you can go as big as possible if the room permits. But if you're going with a pantry, that's really, really important. Of course, you want to have pullouts in it. You want to make it accessible as possible, but plan for storage. And that's one way that you should definitely go, is with pantries. And the reason I don't like to go any narrower, unless it's going to be used for vacuum, broom closet, or something like that, or a specialized pullout, is that the narrower it gets, the more difficult it is to get things in and out of it. Even with pullouts, although that's better, if you have a 15-inch or a 12-inch pantry, then the pullouts are going to be quite a bit narrower than that still. And it's just not as convenient, though it's better than just having shelves. So whatever size you're going with a pantry, definitely have pullouts. But as wide as you can get, the better, in my opinion. Of course, this depends on your floor plan. It depends on how much room you have to spare. And what some people do is they'll tell me, at least, I want a pantry, but I want countertop space. I have to kind of give up one to get more of the other. That's usually the way it goes. And so what's more important to them? Do they need more countertop space? Can they get away with a smaller pantry? Which you'd be surprised that you can get quite a lot in a smaller pantry. Or do you want a bigger pantry and you can get away with not having as much countertop space. Drawers, we talk about drawers a lot, but that's the next thing I'll think about. How many drawers and what kind of drawers and where the drawers are going to go and how many drawers can I fit into this kitchen. I like to have as many drawers as I can. And of course, if you want to break the look up, you can change the cabinet style to not go with drawers, or you can go with a 2-drawer or 4 or 3-drawer, whatever it is. And then you want to, of course, have pullouts in anywhere that you can. We'll talk about corners specifically in a second, but pullouts on base cabinets are very important, and you want to think about that. So when you're drawing out your layout and you're seeing what's available for space, these are the things that you should be kind of checking off. What's going to go in this cabinet for a pullout? What can I do here to make this the most convenient, the most functional for me? What's going to go in there that I need to access? You know, what do I have to get in this cabinet that I need a pullout for? Or maybe I don't actually need a pullout in that cabinet. That's possible too. And then there's accessories, and these are things like, you know, your Lazy Susan type of cabinet or accessories, or pull down units or lift up units, or all kinds of different things that you can get, even to cutlery trays and, you know, 2-tier racks and, you know, wire pullouts and all that kind of stuff. You want to think through that, all the different accessories. Now, in a corner cabinet, especially, you're going to definitely want to have some type of accessory to make that as functional as possible. So, you know, in my kitchen, I don't have to worry about it because I did block it off. But if you have any type of corner cabinet, this is what you want to consider when you're, you know, making up that list of what your floor plan is going to look like. And these are definitely things that should be on top of mind when you're going through that process. So when you're planning for storage, think about all those things. Cabinet sourcing, really, you have RTA, which is a ready to assemble, or you have custom. Then you have a bunch of mixture of maybe those two things. RTA is anything that comes in a box. Anything that comes in the box that has to be assembled is called an RTA cabinet, ready to assemble. So this would be IKEA. This would be, you go down to your local Home Depot, and there's a whole aisle there, and there's a whole shelf filled with boxes of doors and cabinets, and you have to put them all together. Understand and know before you get too far along, what kind of cabinets are you going with? Now, you can go with custom, and there's different types of custom cabinets. Of course, you can get semi-custom, which basically is cabinets that are pre-built, and there's lots of options. You can pretty much make any kitchen that you want. Then there's really true custom, which is whatever size it is, that's what you can get. And these are the two basic types of cabinets that you're going to be sourcing. Now, when you're drawing your floor plan, when you're thinking about your future kitchen, when you're going through this process, if you have an idea that I definitely want to go with IKEA, if I'm going to go with that, they have particular sizes. Certain cabinets at certain sizes, they don't have. They have different corner base sizes than other brands. Now, if you're going with, let's say Home Depot, and you're going with their flat packed box RTA cabinet styles, then it's good to know that because they have different sizes as well. Now, if you know this going into the plan, so when you're designing your floor plan, okay, I said center your sink. Well, if you know that your cabinet supplier has a 36-inch sink base, which almost all of them do, then that's great. Then you go to the corner and you say, okay, I have 37 inches to the corner from my centered sink. And I've seen someone say or ask, does it have to be centered? Well, no, nothing has to be centered, but preferably it should be. You have 37 inches and you're going to IKEA and you find out, well, they don't have a 37-inch, the 36-inch sink base or corner base. Theirs is 38. Well, now you have an issue because now you can't even fit a corner base in there. Now, for me, it's no big deal because I would never even think to put one in anyway. But for a lot of people, that's a really big deal. And so it's important to know that beforehand. So knowing the supplier that you're going with is important because that way you can draw up your floor plan in such a way that you know that you're going to be able to get those sizes. Now, if you're going with custom, this becomes less of an issue as long as whoever's building those cabinets for you, is saying, yeah, that's fine. We can build any size we want. Doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter the sizes that you have. We'll talk about everything else in a short version. You should have an understanding of what your flooring is, mostly because it's probably important to understand the thickness of that flooring for a number of reasons. Going back to clearances, if you have hardwood flooring, then that's thicker than if you have ceramic tile. And these are important things to understand. It's also important to know if you're going to put your flooring underneath your cabinets and how high you have to build those cabinets up if you're not going to lay flooring underneath those cabinets. Lighting. This is important because you have to plan out where the lighting is going to go, obviously, and drawing out your floor plan accurately with accurate measurements will help you do this so that you will know where your island boxes are going to go for your hang down pendants, or if you're putting in any other type of lighting. Having this floor plan drawn up is really, really beneficial for all these reasons. Electrical, of course, we talked about outlets, but you also have other appliances that need power or these lights that need power. And just having that general idea is really, really important. Ventilation, of course, is vital. And it's really important to know this because, if you are planning on putting in a range hood and it's on an inside wall somewhere and you're trying to figure out how it's going to get vented out and where it's going to go, or are you venting it? Hopefully you are. Then it's important to understand this at the beginning as well. And so these are just things to think about. You don't have to have them set in stone. This is what you can work out with your designer, or if you're doing it yourself, you can kind of think through this process, but it should be on your mind at least. And then hardware. This could be anything from your handles, but also the actual hardware that you're using, for your drawer boxes. Now, this will be taken care of course, if you're going with a cabinet brand that's already supplying that for you. But if you're having them built yourself, or if you're doing something other than that, it's good to know an idea of what your hardware is. What are the limitations of it? Do you have full extension? Do you have 3/4 extension? What type of closing, operation do you have with your doors? How does the door hinge? Is it a 110-degree hinge? All these little things. Now, you don't have to know all that nitty-gritty stuff, but just having an understanding of, or an idea of, the type of hardware that you want to use is important. Even the very basic thing would be, what kind of handles am I going with? If I have a corner where two cabinets are coming in, have to pass each other, do those handles pass each other? Because the cabinet doors might, but is the handle in the way? So having an idea of these things, not the end of the world at this point, but it is important to think about. Designing a kitchen is one thing, but doing it so that it's truly functional is something completely different. That's why you should go watch this video right now, because it outlines my 5 very best tips on how to create a truly functional kitchen.